JJ Redick re-signs with the Sixers. What does that mean for the team moving forward? How is the offseason looking for them? Our own 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers insider Michael Kaskey-Blomain joining us now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Mike, how you doing on this Monday?
Josh, I'm doing pretty well, man. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. So we got to hit on JJ Redick first. And to me, you look at this guy, everyone said over the weekend this was a priority for the Sixers, right? This is a guy who was a major part of this team on the court and off the court. And I think that between his positive experience with Philadelphia, combined with the fact that we all knew he wanted to be Northeast because that's where his family lives. He lives over there in Brooklyn. So, to me, it just made sense for him to come back. But the bigger story of all this isn't the re-sign as much as that number, because that salary figure is about $10 million less than last year, Mike. And if you think about it, that's another $14 million in cap space for the Sixers to work with this offseason.
Yeah, Josh, the deal is really perfect for the Sixers in that way. It's $10 million less than what JJ made last year, which gives them, like you said, right around 13 or 14 million left to work with this offseason in order to add other talent. Being another one-year deal, it maintains their flexibility going forward for free agency in 2019 and 2020. It doesn't bog them down at all. So it's really an ideal situation for both sides. Like you touched on, JJ wanted to be back in Philly. That was his top priority. You didn't hear a lot of reports or rumors about, his interest or other teams' interest in him, because I think it was pretty well known around the league that he was probably going to be coming back. It was just a matter of, waiting to see if the Sixers were going to have an opportunity to land one of the big fish like LeBron or Paul George, and then see, where the book would have, been after that. But behind those two guys, bringing JJ back was a priority for the team. And like you said, it's something that just fit. And I think, both sides are definitely happy to be running it back again next season.
When you look at JJ, what was the biggest impact to you for this team last year? Was it his leadership? Was it the shooting? What was it about JJ that you saw on this team last year that you felt was the biggest impact he had? And what do you think that's going to mean for the team moving forward?
If we're going to say single impact, I think it has to be the shooting, just because it works so well in unison with what the Sixers have in his ability to really space the floor. Just complements Joel and Ben so well, and it gives them, something that they desperately need out on the floor. They still need more shooting, obviously, with, especially with the departures of Marco and Irsan. But, the JJ's leadership is huge too. Absolutely. That played a big role in, his importance to the team. But his ability to space the floor, I think, is the main thing for the Sixers. And it's why he works so well for the team. He's not a guy that can really create his own offense off the dribble. He's obviously not a guy that's going to necessarily drive it to the rim a lot and create contact. But when you have a guy like Ben Simmons that can do that and get into the paint and create opportunities, and a guy like Joel that can just command the attention that he does in the post or wherever he is on the floor, having a guy that's known to be as deadly as JJ has just really opened things up. And I think, his impact on the offense with his shooting is huge.
So now that you got this $14 million left on the cap, you bring in JJ. That was a priority for you this weekend. What do you think the next couple moves are for the Sixers? Because we saw that Bellinelli returned to the Spurs. Ilyasova returns to the Bucks. We saw that Trevor Ariza signs that fat contract for 1 year with the Suns. So there's certain dominoes that are already falling. And let's be realistic. Outside of LeBron, most of the guys that were signed by the Lakers so far are not guys that were probably on the Sixers' radar. So who left out there in free agency do you think are going to be targets for the Sixers?
There's definitely a few guys. Positionally, specifically, I think they're going to be looking for a couple wings, two-way wings and wings that can shoot. And then, reserve big guys, a little bit more depth to back up Joel and Dario. With Irsan leaving, they brought Rashawn back. But, there's interest in Kyle O'Quinn from the New York Knicks was a name that was mentioned. I've been told from a team source that they've been interested in potentially bringing back Luke Mbah-a-Moute, who was, with the team a couple years ago when Joel Embiid was a rookie. Wayne Ellington from the Miami Heat is a name that, would make some sense with his ability to shoot and spread the floor and kind of play, both ends of the floor, and he has ties to Philadelphia. So guys like that would be, not commanding a major salary, but they could maybe get in that, $10-12 million range, to bolster the depth on the wing and down low. I think they're probably their top priorities.
When you look overall at the big picture for this team, even if there's no Kawhi trade, do you think the Sixers could be active participants in the trade market? One name I heard this morning that got floated out there is, if you want to maybe go poach Kyle Korver from the Cavs, you could save the Cavs some money, and he could be a guy coming off the bench. Are those the kind of trades that maybe the Sixers could be involved in if they don't get a Kawhi?
Yeah, I could definitely see them getting involved in a trade with, they still have cap space. They still have some, smaller scale attractive assets that they could use to, potentially get into a trade. They're interested, obviously, in moving on from Jared Bayless's contract. There's, if the right opportunity presented itself to rid themselves of that contract, which might require, getting involved in a 2 or 3 way trade and giving up another asset. I think that's something they would consider. Or if they had an opportunity to, kind of jump in and get another asset for the future, whether it would be a draft pick or something along those lines in exchange for taking on another contract, maybe something like that. But I could definitely see, they'll continue to obviously monitor the trade market regardless of what happens with Kawhi Leonard.
Speaking of Kawhi, so what is the latest on him? I know over the weekend it looked like the Sixers were still involved in it, but now it looks like there's reports that Kawhi is saying, look, I don't care what anybody says, I'm going to Lakers. But yet we still haven't heard from Kawhi himself, so who really knows what that guy is thinking? So what is the status of the Sixers' pursuit of Kawhi?
That's what makes it so hard, Josh. We never hear from Kawhi directly. We haven't heard from Kawhi directly in months, so there's just so much speculation and rumor mill around the situation that it becomes hard to separate fact from fiction. The latest appears to be that the Spurs haven't completely given up hope of holding on to Kawhi, but they're also, obviously taking in the trades and the offers that are potentially coming in. The main sticking point, of course, for most teams at this point that would be looking to trade for Kawhi is, his interest in joining the Lakers, either in the short term or next summer in 2019 in free agency. And the concern of a team like the Sixers or the Celtics, another team that have, potentially have the assets to acquire Kawhi, but without a guarantee that he would be there for longer than a single season, teams would be very hesitant to part with, too many assets, which, makes a lot of sense. There was a report from Jabari Young of the San Antonio Express News, a Philly guy who's pretty plugged in with all things Spurs, that Kawhi would potentially consider staying in Philly longer than a single season if he were traded here this offseason, which, that's obviously noteworthy. If he were willing to stay in Philly at that point, the assets that the organization would feel comfortable offering, I think the risk would be minimized, and they would probably be willing to, up the ante in terms of what it would take to get Kawhi. But without a close to a guarantee, or at least a strong suggestion that he'll at least consider staying in Philadelphia longer than a single season, I think the organization will have a really tough time, pulling the trigger on a deal for Kawhi and to give up the assets that it would take that San Antonio would be looking for to get a deal done.
Well, Mike, doesn't that get back to the element of, we just saw what happened with Paul George. He kept saying for years, I'm going to go to the Lakers. He gets to OKC, Russell Westbrook sells him, the organization sells him on staying, and he isn't just re-signed for 1 year, he signed for multiple years, and that contract is set up that after year 2, he could re-sign, get that supermax, and possibly stay in OKC even longer. So is there a part of the Sixers organization and other teams that say, look, if Kawhi goes to the right situation, he may not be as sold on going to the Lakers as he is right at this second?
Yeah, I think so, Josh. I do believe that's the case, and I think there's people that feel that they, would have a good chance to keep Kawhi long term if they got him here for a season, could pitch him over the course of the year on the culture, on the future, on the talents they currently have on the roster, just like Oklahoma City did in Paul George. That's obviously a great comparison for this situation. Oklahoma took a big risk in making that move with him having 1 year left on the deal and is wanting to be in LA. It obviously worked out perfectly for them. They got him on the the long-term commitment. So in best case scenario, I think that does give some hope to the Sixers front office that, a similar situation could happen in Philadelphia, especially with some of the connections between the Sixers and Kawhi. Obviously the Brett Brown connection. He coached Kawhi during his first 2 years in San Antonio. And, Dr. Glasgow, who was, Kawhi's secondary doctor, who he was working with away from the Spurs during the season, is, the Sixers team doctor. So there's some connections there. And I do think that there's some belief within the organization if they can get Kawhi here, that they could definitely convince him to stay long term. It just at this point, I think it's really just a matter of, what they're willing to offer and what the Spurs are asking. I think there's a difference right there that needs to be bridged if a deal is going to get done.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain joining us right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter for all your Sixers news at The Real Mike KB. That's at The Real Mike KB. And check out his post at 97.3ESPN.com. Mike, turning it full circle, because obviously, the big news of the weekend was LeBron. And to me, I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, did the Sixers strike out? And I like and I play the audio on my show on Saturday. Guys like Kevin Arnovitz, who covers the NBA, a former NBA player, former coach like Byron Scott, they both said, look, if the Sixers don't get a LeBron or a Paul George, it's not a strikeout. To me, the positive in all this isn't a strikeout. You actually got a meeting. You're one of only 3 teams to even get a meeting with his people. Yeah, he wasn't there in person, but there's something to be said for how far the Sixers have come to the point where in 2018 they could actually get a sit down with Rich Paul to even have that conversation. So to me, some people may say there's a lot of negatives out of this weekend, but to me, I still see a lot of positives for Philadelphia.
No, absolutely, Josh. I definitely see more positives out of the situation than negatives. I mean, of course, obviously they would have loved to land a LeBron or a Paul George, but like you said, the fact that LeBron seriously considered the Sixers, they were one of the 3 or 4 teams that he gave thought to have Rich Paul meet with. I think it is indicative of the direction that the team's heading, what they've been able to instill in terms of the culture and the talent on the team. And I don't, that was, of course, the best case scenario, going hunting for stars, as Brett Brown put it. But we're talking about a team in its first year of cohesion with, a rookie in Ben Simmons and, basically a rookie plus in Joel, as he only played 30 games before last season, that won 52 games and went to the second round. I mean, I think you run, obviously there'll be some tweaks and changes, but you run back the same starting 5 that the Sixers had last year, bringing JJ back, and you add a little more depth over this offseason, you're looking at a team that could potentially win 55 to 60 games. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. They struggled out of the gate last year. Obviously, Ben was getting acclimated to the league. They were getting acclimated to playing with each other. I think with last season under their belt, getting to the second round, the starting lineup last year was amongst the best in the entire NBA. I think, bringing that same team back, or largely the same team, would, result in especially with LeBron out of the East, we could be competing for a top 2 seed in the East with the Boston Celtics. Obviously, the Raptors will be there, the Wizards. There's other teams, but I don't think missing out on these free agents is a big issue at all. If anything, I think the fact that LeBron met with the Sixers and considered them will kind of give credence to the team moving forward in free agency. If you have other guys that say, like, LeBron considered this team, he met with them. Obviously, he didn't pick it, but maybe, he saw something in this team. Maybe I should give them a look also. So, long term, sure, we would have liked to have LeBron, but I don't think the Sixers are really any worse off, certainly, than they were, not landing them.
What are your thoughts on LeBron going to L.A.? How are you feeling? What was your initial reaction? And, what are you thinking about 18 hours later?
I was a little disappointed, Josh, just by default. I thought it would have been great for him to come to Philly, and I thought, staying in Cleveland would have been, I associate him so much with the Cavaliers. It's still, I think, going to be really strange to see him in a Lakers jersey. I respect his decision, obviously, to do what he wanted to do and what's best for him. He certainly earned it, and I think it's especially interesting that he went to a Lakers team that's, doesn't appear to be ready to, truly compete right away, rather than, people were saying that he could potentially go ring chasing and look for just the best opportunity. He went to the Lakers on a 4-year deal, which is basically saying, this is where I want to be long term for potentially the rest of my career, regardless of what the roster says right now. I'm willing to, be a little bit patient, despite the fact that he's 33. He knows it's probably not going to be a team that can, take out the Warriors in the Western Conference playoffs this year. So, I mean, I was disappointed. I've never been obviously living in Philadelphia, I've never been a Lakers guy. I'll, continue to watch, obviously, and support LeBron. But I think for the league, it'll be cool to have, just on a broader scale, a guy of the magnitude of LeBron playing it for, a franchise with as much history and as much, fan and star power as the Lakers. But, personally, I would have liked to see him, obviously come to Philly or stay in Cleveland rather than, go out to the Lakers.
I still am running into people last night and this morning who are surprised about LeBron going, and I think it gets back to, and Mike, you've been in plenty of locker rooms, been in plenty of press conferences, been around players. I think sometimes that we forget that when we put our perspective on players, we don't always understand where they're coming from. We don't always understand their motivations. A player's motivation may not be you or my motivation for doing things. So, how do you feel like sometimes that we confuse our sensibilities and try to place them on these players instead of fully understanding what their motivations are for the decisions they make?
Definitely, Josh. I mean, there's definitely projection in, when we talk about these decisions or judge them, what we think of players do or what we think would be best for their legacy. But, at the end of the day, especially a guy like LeBron, who's kind of been a trailblazer in terms of, changing the narrative in terms of how superstar players are, go about their career rather than being a guy that, played with one franchise throughout his career. He's going to go down as, one of the best players of all time, and he's going to be associated now with 3 different franchises, which is something that's, kind of different from, the norm of what you see in terms of players in their prime, at least. So I think, this is obviously a move that he made that he thought would be, the best case for not only himself in his career, but something that his family was comfortable with. It sets up his sons to go to, spend their high school years in LA and grow out there and, try to make it to the league themselves. It's somewhere that he can just be. So, it's pretty obvious based off their lineup that in this particular situation, competing for a championship in the short term kind of took a back seat, which I think was kind of surprising to me and probably a lot of other people. I think LeBron is, we know him to be in this constant win now mode, 8 straight NBA Finals appearances, chasing Michael Jordan's 6 rings. I think to, willingly go into a situation where he acknowledges it might take a year or 2 to, actually get back to that level to compete. I think it just shows that it was about, the decision was about a lot more than strictly basketball. And at that point, like you said, whatever the outside people would like to see him to do, at the end of the day, it's, a personal decision. He clearly thought that that's the best situation for him to be in moving forward.
Getting back to the Sixers, I've heard this comment multiple times over the last week, and I want to get your perspective on it. People keep bringing up to me about Jonah Bolden, and look, I think the kid is a special freak athlete. The little I've seen of him between UCLA and Europe, I like what he brings to the table. Some of those dunks and rebounds he had in summer league were impressive. But if he does come over the Sixers this year, how much can we really expect contribution-wise from him?
I don't think we can necessarily expect a lot, Josh. I think we could definitely expect him to play a role and get some minutes, but I don't know how much you can necessarily project to be able to say, okay, he's going to come and plug in, directly behind Joel and be the backup big guy and log, 24, 26, whatever minutes a game. I don't know. That might be asking a little much. I don't think he's, from what I've seen, he doesn't seem to be quite as polished as, let's say, Dario Saric was 2 years ago when he came over from Turkey to join the Sixers. And he, his rookie season, he came in and contributed right away. I don't think Bolden is quite at that point in his, just in his development of the game where he can come in and have that, a similar impact or role. I think that, we can expect him, if he does come over and he gets on the roster, I think we can definitely expect some, some highlight plays and some contributions. But I think it would be, getting ahead of ourselves a little bit to assume that he would be, potentially suited for a backup role this year. I think that they'll want to bring in another guy through free agency to serve as the immediate backup, and then, put him in a situation where there's not necessarily expectations on him, but more so it's, benefits anytime he gets in there and gets experience.
Sixers Summer League. What do you think of the team they're sending out there? Do you, what are you looking forward to from that roster? Because some of the guys people don't know, but, you do have Smith and Shamet from the draft. You do also have Korkmaz, which is an interesting addition for me for the Summer League team. So what are some of the guys, some of the things that you're going to be looking for from the Sixers Summer League team?
Yeah, Josh. I mean, I'd like to be diplomatic, but it's definitely a pretty ugly summer league roster. I guess if you want to say it doesn't have the same flair that I think some of the recent
Mike,
are
you saying this is not a sexy summer league roster?
You could say that, Josh. I think that's fair. But it doesn't have the same flair that last year did with a Markelle Fultz, or 2 years ago with Ben, or even the previous years. I think this year, for me personally, I think like a lot of the guys, I don't think many of the names on that roster have much of a shot at all to land on the regular season roster. They're just most of the roster spots are already accounted for. The ones that aren't are going to go to free agents that can contribute in the now, not not projects that will take development. It's not it's not 3 years ago in Philly now. So for me, I'm going to be looking mainly at the two guys you mentioned, Landry and Zaire, to see what they can bring to the floor, really, because I think those are the two guys that have potential to contribute to the team immediately next season. So I think it'll be the summer league, really, for me, and watching it this year will really just be to see what kind of game they bring to the table. Obviously, we've seen them in college. It'll be interesting to see how they stack up against the other rookies. I'll be interested to see how Landry kind of plays off the ball. It's something that he'll be asked to do a lot of if and when he gets minutes this season, spotting up and knocking down some shots. And obviously, Zaire is a two-way guard that's going to be a pit bull sort of guy for Brett Brown. It'll be interesting to see how he gets after it and competes. And Cork Maz, like you said, that's another guy, obviously, who will be on the roster. So those three, I think, obviously, watching his development to see how he's kind of developed since last year. We saw him get some garbage time for the team throughout the season last year. It'll be interesting to see how he, his development has continued, and see if it's gotten to the point where he can come in and get minutes that aren't necessarily garbage time, but come in and be a shooter off the bench for this team, because that would be something that they could, certainly use if it was, if he was able to contribute on both ends of the floor and keep himself out there. His ability to space the floor is something that they could certainly find room for. So, I think those three guys is what I'll be, focused in on this summer.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here on Middays with Q on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig filling in for Rich Quinones on a Monday. Follow Mike on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB. And as all guests, he appeared for you, the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Mike, appreciate the time on a Monday, and stay hydrated, okay?
Thanks, Josh, man. You too.